Greetings. We're going to talk today about both sides of the enterprise, both the OLTP part, the OLTP side, as well as DNS and Wiz, and chat a little bit about some of the things that we've been doing lately. To start with, the total number of registrars accessing the registry today in production is 44. That's up from about high 20s last time we spoke. There are 42 that are actually qualified, ready to go into production. So we expect over the next 2 months or so to have about 80 folks in production. That'll be about, we expect the rest of the 30 to be in production probably by a couple months after that. On to daily transactions. On the OLTP side, in terms of adds, mods, deletes, and checks of domain names using registrar protocol, we're averaging for the quarter about 19.5 million operations a day. That's biased because it started a little bit lower in the beginning part of the quarter. We're actually running about 25 million a day, substantially above our projections and our rejiggered projections after the fourth quarter of last year. Breaking that down a little bit further into the types of transactions, can actually talk about the number of adds versus mods versus deletes. Lumping all those together, we're seeing about 8.4 million of those a month, at least in the month of May. About 18 million queries and over 600 million checks. You can see that the growth rates have been pretty astounding. Fortunately, check is a pretty lightweight operation, but even the reads and writes are increasing pretty rapidly. It's kept us busy. In terms of our service level agreement, the actual penalties for the agreement go into effect June 15th, next day or two. We've been abiding by it since the beginning of the year. And basically, through January and February, we had, actually in January, had several planned outages to implement some government-mandated upgrades. Our average round-trip time for a check within the data center was about 600 milliseconds, about 2.5 seconds per add. That went up a bit in February in terms of performance, and there were no planned outages at all or unplanned. Looking at March, April, and May, most of the planned outages were for upgrades to try to deal with the exploding load. April was particularly difficult. We nearly doubled the capacity of the application servers coming into the registry. We also, in March, deployed the new mechanism for measuring the service level agreement. Part of the requirement is that we actually measure for each individual operation the round-trip time within the data center. So you got to pull a get time of day when it comes in. When you push out the last spot, you pull it again and do a difference. And we actually have to take all of those, every single one, and measure and average them out for the month. So the reports, just to figure out the SLA for the month, run for about 26 hours right now. Generates about 8 to 10 gigabytes of log a day just to measure the SLA. Anyway, with that, we went to a much finer-grained mechanism to measure what the performance is as opposed to what we were using before. And these numbers are actual averages of every single operation done for the month. So you can see it went up a little bit in April as we were trying to deal with the load. We put in a lot more capacity, so the performance went down, and the performance got better in May. We also, this doesn't show, we actually had an unplanned outage in the very beginning of June. A power distribution strip blew, and both the primary load balancer and the backup were on the same strip, so they both went down. Not too bright. We went through and made sure that wasn't the case anywhere else. Anyway, going to DNS and the root server. This displays the total number of UDP queries in per second. And you can see that the red line is midnight. This is a 5-minute average, so it tends to smooth peaks. You'll see peaks that run into the 12 to 15,000 per second range over a second or two. We're seeing somewhere between 9,500 and 10,000 a day. I think this is later in the week. Weekends drop down to about 5,000 or so, 4,500. You can also see the 30-minute average for a longer period of time. Looking at drops, the A route right now looks pretty sharp. Very few drops apart from the restarts. If you're wondering what the other restart at midnight is, due to some memory leak issues, we restart named Since this graph has been taken, I believe we've moved to restarting it during one of the regular loads. There's no reason to restart it 3 times, right? So rather than reload, we restart one of the reloads and then do a reload. So there's only 2 of those a day. Looking also at the GTLD specifically, one of the more busy GTLDs, apart from the one on the A route, is J. And this shows you the approximate, during peak at 10 to 6 or so, we're running about 2,200 to 2,500 per second. You can also see M, which is in Hong Kong, and that's substantially lower. Doesn't get much above 2,000 per second. The interesting part about all this, actually let me back up for a minute. A couple other stats that aren't up here are WHOIS. We're seeing about 17 to 20 million WHOIS queries a day. Most of those, over 90%, are split between folks that are mining the data or registrars that have done a recursive WHOIS, so that you go to their site, do a WHOIS query, and it'll come to us if it's on their database, and resolve figure out which registrar to go to and pull the data. So, but most of it is folks mining the WHOIS database. Tons of wildcard queries, A1, etc. The other things in terms of customer service, we're averaging about 120, 130 calls a week. They're split between relatively simple data or technical things and some very painful policy issues. Getting through all the agreements with the registrars, getting them started up. The policy calls average more than half an hour, about 33, 35 minutes per call. The other ones are much quicker in the 5 to 10 minute range. I want to talk a little bit about some of the things we've been doing to try to scale the operation for a couple minutes, and talk a little bit about what happened with the A-route recently. Some of you may or may not have been familiar with some of the experience with the A-route performance. Basically, the bottom line on the back end side is we saw some dramatic growth. Our SLA, which is going into effect, will cost us somewhere between $400,000 and $500,000 a day, paid back to registrars when we don't meet performance or availability requirements. And with the kind of growth rates, we need to do something different for the database. We evaluated Sun, IBM, and HP, and then actually did a hands-on evaluation of IBM porting all our code. Most of it's Java in the main OLTP part, so it was pretty quick. And also took a look at the E10K. In the end, what we found was that the IBM, surprisingly, because we've been a Sun shop since forever, was just a screamer, very fast. Got some great support. The Java implementation actually was real sharp. We were pretty surprised to find out how much IBM's invested in it. So the bottom line is we put this in shadow production mode for the last month and a little bit in parallel with the Sun. We switched over this weekend, and our latencies have dropped for the database-heavy operations by about a factor of 40%, 50%. As we're averaging on a busy day about 260, 270 milliseconds during peak, they've dropped to about 150, 160 or so. Why that's important is RRP is a synchronous protocol. So especially for registrars in North America, that kind of a drop in the latency of the command, where the network latency is preloaded to begin with, will substantially increase the amount of throughput you can get per connection. Because we're running, in the order of 1,000 or more connections per day, and that's increasing. The other side is scaling DNS. Some of you at least have heard of the fact that we're putting out the next generation 64-bit architecture. I'll talk a little bit about what happened with A-route shortly. But anyway, we evaluated the various platforms and went with an IBM M80. The Sunbox just didn't have the horsepower, at least at this time, given that Vine's single-threaded. And the HP product was real solid. It actually won the performance benchmark, but compared to the last generation IBM. The bottom line is we're deploying M80s for more than half the GTLD servers. We're also doing a deal with Sun to put 24 gigabytes in the 4500 and 4 processors and run 2 versions of Vine per 4500 to get some sort of reasonable performance. In the meantime, though, while we were doing all this, this shows you the resolutions per day on the A-route and sort of how things were falling off. As we were watching the A-route over between November and January, February, early February, we noticed that the classic growth curve, about doubling every 6 months, had just leveled off. And we were thinking, well, this could be great, because at the rate we were growing, I mean, we were trying to figure out, how much hardware we were going to need. Although it seemed a little suspicious that, this curve that's been going on since forever suddenly just sort of stopped. The percent drops started increasing, and then all of a sudden, the A route just started to thrash. I mean, if you actually saw, I don't think I have them here yet, if you actually saw the packet drops literally over a period of 2, 3, 4 days, the packet drops went from 10, 15% to 50% or more. Got about 12, 13 people working on this around the clock, and the end result was there was no DDoS, nothing. It was just pure load had just overcome the box. And there were a couple little issues. We were getting more dynamic updates as a result of a certain deployment we won't talk about. It was a relatively small percentage, but we had actually had logging turned on, and the loggings would push it over the edge. So basically what we did is we took the box we've been qualifying for the next generation deployment and put that into production, and then upgraded that to IBM's biggest box, which is an S80, which is the current A route. We also tweaked, we were surprised how many TCP connections were just lingering. We were having hundreds and hundreds of TCP connections on the A route. We wrote an assassination server, which basically, when a connection lingers for a little while, sends a reset. But we decided to turn down the keep alive defaults, and sure enough, it turns out that we're into the 10. So a lot of them were TCP connections established that whatever route went away or whatever, the client was no longer visible, but the connection stayed. We also filter out dynamic updates so they don't even get to the route. So this is basically what happened when we deployed. You can see literally the day of deployment, the total number of resolutions for the day doubled over what it was before. Another way of looking at it is looking at the drops. If you look at this, generally the load on the A route goes up around 9 o'clock, between 8 and 10, and it stays pretty level there until about 6 or so. You can see where we deployed it was exactly 11. One last bit is in terms of making more of the operation of the registry, both the OLTP side and DNS, accessible to folks. We're piloting some near real-time stats. In other words, towards the end of the year or very early Q1, we're going to have a site, DNS Central, where you'll be able to go to and click on the various GTLD root servers that at least we run, and take a look at some average stats, take a look at a real-time feed, go back and look at some historicals. What you see here, which may be very hard to read, is on the left-hand side. By the way, this thing updates about once every 5 seconds, so it'll show you the actual type of requests, both per second and percentage coming in by request type. It'll show you the packet counts, UDP packets going in and out. It'll show you the TLDs that are getting hit per second, as well as the most popular, the 10, 20, 30, it's configurable, most popular names that are being queried and where they're from and how many are duplicates. As we've been watching this a lot more closely, we're finding that there are a fair number of misconfigured servers out there. There was one particular fellow who was running a server that had gotten caught in an infinite loop and was querying the same domain name at about 100 per second on the A route. No idea why. We called him up. He was very apologetic and stopped. But actually, it was amazing. We got updates from him on a couple-hour basis for a week as to what he was doing. He got a little nervous about the whole situation. But as we're following up on this, a lot of I'd estimate somewhere between 10 and 15% of the load on the A route is just spurious stuff, misconfigurations, queries coming from the exact same client for the exact same name, same IP address, hundreds of times a second. So we're following up on those. But anyway, in terms of openness, look for DNS Central over the next probably about 3 or 4 months, and you'll start seeing some near real-time stats on what's going on in the GTLD constellation. Any questions? Yes, Paul?
Only one minor comment, which is that those of us who run digital Unix on our comm servers don't have any memory leak problems.
Really?
So my named runs 6 months at a time between upgrades, and it has the only reason it grows is because comm gets bigger. Okay.
We're seeing some memory leak. It may. We'll talk to David. We're starting to work pretty closely with Nominum on that. Thank you. By the way, the comment about memory leaks is for the version of Bind we're running on Sun, which would be 8.1.2 with all the patches that we put in place and some tweaks as well. So that's not a comment about the current version 8.2 or 8.2.8. Any other questions? Thank you.